Hey, it's Amethyst Virgo. I'm here with a much awaited video about Lilith, okay? So I'm here to talk about Lilith in your birth chart and Lilith in general, because I understand some people are coming with different, sorry, I'm on my webcam, so I'm looking all different types of directions, different levels of information about Lilith. And many times in mainstream society, we hear Lilith used as a bad archetype, right? You watch a movie, TV show, it has a supernatural element to it. The female who comes and is destructive is a Lilith or something of that nature. And we've heard of it also as a sense of empowerment, right? And many of you may remember years ago used to be some, I don't know if they still have it, called the Lilith Fair. So Lilith has many different meanings, but she is essential to understanding this archetype, right? That we hear her name in many ways. So you will see that there are different symbols to represent Lilith. There are different types of Liliths in your chart. There are actually 4 Lilith placements. I will talk to you about what I use and what is the most important. But also please stay as well for the breakdown of the history. If you don't know where Lilith comes from, if you don't know the history of Lilith, if you don't understand, it is important to listen and not just jump. I know we want to jump into our placement, our sign. I know you guys want to go to the timestamps, but it's very important to understand the mythology behind situations in astrology, or different archetypes and different planets, and the history and the myths and all of these different things to really understand what it is. So I do have some suggested readings for people who are more interested in understanding the feminine archetype. Listen, I'm a Venus in Cancer, Moon in Sag. Right? It's important, especially when history has been buried, for us to understand that no, this concept of women being meek and docile and inferior and all these different things is actually not true if you actually study history of various cultures. There's so much evidence of just different times in history and different cultures where the role of the woman was not to be subservient and the role of the woman was not diminished, and how in those societies, men and women actually did coexist together and, you know, respected each other's respective role. That's not me saying that you have to have this role or that role in 2022, but I am saying that this idea that we have to always have one person over the top of the other is not always the case in every single situation. Now, of course, you're always going to have people who have more experience, more power, more influence, whatever. But for anyone who's more interested in these topics, these are 2 really good books that really talk about just the journey of, you know, the mythical and spiritual history of women, feminine energy, things of that nature, in terms of women, in terms of different roles in society, in terms of women's influence and things of that nature, right? Okay. Now, understanding her story is going to help you understand why Lilith is described the way it is in this video. Okay, and again, the reason why early in the video I gave suggested readings is I cannot go over everything about Lilith. Of course, I'm going to miss certain things, but this is great for people who are kind of like, I'm at a starting point, I don't really get it. What's up with Lilith? And I've said a lot of you who gotten readings from me, when I go over your Black Moon Lilith, I'm like, I'm going to do a video on her. She's not bad, but this might sound bad. So I want to really have us understand her. One, you may hear her commonly known as someone to be feared. The fear she evokes is in her sexual feminine power. She can be like a sexual demon. She is kind of luring someone in. She's seductive, but she's really gonna, cause destruction. That's what you typically hear in the modern world in terms of like TV films and things like that. Anytime Lilith is mentioned, usually there are some symbolism that you can notice is connected to her. I think symbolism is really important to study if you're interested in spirituality or astrology, anything of that nature. The Lilu, the lotus flower. Also, she could be representative of genital magic. The flower, yoni, those different keywords sometimes can be associated with her. Now, there's different time periods, there's different myths about her. So again, if you're interested, do your research. I'm sure there's other books as well that follow just Lilith's journey. She's depicted even in Babylonia as a lady with wings and clawed owl feet. Okay, and what do we know about owls? They come out at night. owls are wise. They're considered wise. And they are very symbolic. If you remember a couple of years ago, owls were really big, and like there was a lot of jewelry that had owls on them. So she's connected to that animal, that bird. She's also described as sometimes depicted as strong and regal. In some ways, Lilith is not described as just this overly sexual being that's going to, overpower a man or something like that. Now, because of her myth and how she defied God in the myth, she's also described as a woman who's to be feared during childbirth. So women were told, if Lilith visits you, that's going to be bad for you and your child. In the Hebrew version of Lilith, she's an evil temptress. Now, also in that version, what you may notice is she sometimes is considered to be the one who tempted Eve to eat the apple to disrupt the Garden of Eden, that she was the snake. So sometimes you'll hear someone say, oh, well, she was the snake. She got Eve to do it. And I'll talk about Eve in a minute. We may sometimes see Lilith linked with Taureau. Okay, Taureau is another placement in astrology. Not common. Now, don't worry. If you don't know what it is, don't worry. I always tell people, you can understand astrology well without knowing certain things. But once you get to a point where you want to put it all together, you want to know, when do I use this? When do I not use this? When do I use this? What is important? That's when you start worrying about all these things that I'm mentioning that you may not have heard of. Taureau and Lilith are octaves between Mars and Pluto. As you may know, certain asteroids and certain placements have a connection to the planets. Just like when I did Juno, it had a connection to the signs, right? Just like when we deal with certain asteroids, they connect more to a planet. So octave is just something that is connected to the energy. So Lilith kind of and Taureau are both connected to this idea of power, this idea of destruction, and this idea of aggression even, right? Now, quick facts. So you're like, wait, Lilith, Eve, what is all this? So first of all, Lilith is purported to be Adam's first wife. Now again, you don't have to be Christian. You don't have to have a Bible next to you to understand this, but understanding this will help you understand Lilith. She's Adam's first wife. All right, one text refers to them as even, or many texts refers to them as equals. They were made as equals, okay? They were made to both have power, to both have influence, okay? Now, the myth is that she refused to, now again, I'm pretty sure there's more to this, but this is just me in the quick notes. She refused to lie in the missionary position because she felt that would be saying that she was submissive, okay? And again, this is all symbolic, so you don't have to like take everything literally. And, they got into an argument over that, and basically Lilith was a strong-willed woman. Right? So religious texts dictate that that was a subservient position, right? And so the importance here is that caused a chain reaction. So she flew away to the Red Sea, apparently. She refused to come back, which means you're disobeying God, right? Now, another version said God sent angels to come and get her and found her engaging in promiscuity. She apparently procreated with demons and had hundreds of children, okay? So what's interesting here, again, you have to look at all of this as hypothetical. The more you look at it as a plot line, it'll make sense to you no matter what you believe in. So basically, she's the descendant, there's descendants supposedly of Adam and Lilith, and some are descendants of Adam and Eve. And that's a very interesting thing to think about because Eve is supposedly the more submissive woman. She had to listen, and she also didn't have a mind of her own, supposedly, which is why she didn't listen, and she ate the apple, and she destroyed everything, right? And this root of women being blamed for everything wrong comes from that. Okay, whether you believe in religion or whether you believe in the Bible or not, there is that root of that. You get what I'm saying? So Eve was a submissive replacement, and Eve is of his supposed rib, not Lilith. You'll hear, oh, woman is of man's rib, right? Where really, it was Eve that supposedly was, because he just wanted another version of someone that was going to listen to him, right? So he didn't want someone with her own mind, okay, which would have been Lilith. Okay, who rejected that. Now, the Great Cosmic Mother book that I just put earlier in the video, that is a suggested reading for people interested in these topics. It says in the book, what an interesting reversal, because in Genesis it is Father God who creates all life. So this idea of taking creation and kind of minimizing the role of the woman and saying it's, everything is the male. So what if you came out of a woman, or we are from women? It is Father God who controlled that. So again, all I'm saying is this is just how things have been done to not have both both genders have their own power. And again, I'm talking about the myth and the history of it. We have to understand the history of things regardless of, you know, our own identities. I'm simply talking about the fact of this taking of power from women that has happened historically, but history always tells us that has always been women who had power, their own minds, and who had their own influence. So this has always been happening. It's not a recent thing because of the modern woman, right? And debates on this, but Lilith disappeared from the canonical Bible. Lilith myths also say protect the genitals, protect children from her. Basically, these myths were saying that Lilith is something to be feared, right? So what I want us to look at now, for astrology's purposes, you're like, okay, Lilith and Adam and Eve, and what about me? What does this have to do with me? So first of all, there are different symbols for the different Liliths. If you're using the asteroid Lilith, like go to sometimes even astro.com. If you don't have a software, go to astro.com, go to extended chart, and you can plug in your Liliths. You can like find where they are. But the point is basically this is the common one that you'll see. Like if you're using Time Passages app, you're going to literally see that. That's the most common one that you'll see. And on the beginning of the slide, I had one of the sigils of Lilith. So sometimes you'll see that as well. Okay. So basically there are different ones. In astrology, there are a lot of hypothetical points that are not actually detected by the human eye. The dark moon Lilith is also called the Waldemath Black Moon. Again, once I explain all this, I think it'll make sense. Now, the true Lilith is a wilder energy. So if you go to astro.com or if you have a software and you find your true Lilith, that is going to be a place where maybe there is the most rebellion, literally, where you are the most, because it's wilder, because it's literally the literal orbit of Lilith. And it's not most commonly used. It's the point between moon and earth. It is a hypothetical point. But because it is a point between moon and earth, that's why I think it is very helpful to use. Typically, people are going to relate to this. However, if you were getting an in-depth reading, a feminine archetype reading, astrology reading, or something like that, you might go through all your Liliths. You might, how is this important for you? I would look at it like this. All of these kind of represent the journey of Lilith. The first two Liliths are going to be her rejection, her feelings of shame. The oscillating Lilith is going to be more of the liberation sometimes, right? Like what you're doing to be free. What is the thing you're doing to be free, right? See, in my readings, I typically give advice. Hey, your Black Moon Lilith is right here. This can mean this, and this is where you can like break free from it. You get what I'm saying? But in readings, you're not in an average chart reading. You're not going to have time to go through all these. You're not. So you're going to want to, I pick the one I think is the most important for most people, and then make you understand how that connects to the rest of your chart in some areas where you could be rejecting something, where you could feel shame, a part of yourself where you don't really want to acknowledge this part of yourself. Just like with Lilith, she's rebelling. She had to find herself. She had to deal with a difficult situation of being banished in order to find out who she really was. So sometimes Lilith can represent these feelings of isolation because we're really on this journey to find our true power. Without someone telling us what our power is, you're actually on a journey of discovering it on your own. All right, so before I jump into it, as a reminder, these are the phases of Lilith. And depending on where you are in your life, in terms of your journey, depending on your acceptance of your Lilith energy, depending on your relationship with the rebellious nature of the feminine archetype, whether you are a woman, whether you are a man, depending on how you view women and feminine energy that is rebellious will create a different experience for you. For example, sometimes you can have men who have trouble with a Lilith type woman. You can have men who are drawn to a Lilith type woman. So no matter what your gender is, you still have a Lilith sign. You still can dive into this. But again, a chart interpretation will be specifically for you. I will not interpret anyone's Lilith via YouTube comment because it is too complex. Okay. Also, this Lilith video I've been working on for a long time. It may not look like a lot, but it took me a long time to really process what I wanted to say about Lilith. And all of my interpretations are completely for me. I did reference in the beginning of this video some books you can read and some works of some other folks. But at the end of the day, I just want to share that these are all original interpretations of what I have come to understand and channel and to give this type of just breakdown of Lilith. So if you have Lilith in Aries, okay, so this is about acting in pure self-interest. Remember, we are not talking about the vitality of the sun. Lilith is not the sun. Lilith is not Mercury. Lilith is not Mars, okay? We are dealing with an archetype here. And the archetype of Lilith, when it's in Aries and it has not gone through that fourth cycle of acceptance, is intentional exclusion. There's a fear of needing anyone. There's a fear of not being free. There's a fear that you're missing out when you are cautious. There's a fear like, if I don't do this now, that I can't get what I want, or someone is going to try to control me. So this can sometimes lead to being very impulsive. It can lead to making decisions that you're letting your pure instincts or your fear kind of drive you away from situations where you could benefit. An example of a Lilith in Aries could be of the person maybe has Venus in the 10th house conjunct Lilith in Aries. And maybe this person, you know, got married at a very early age, trying to say, oh, I'm going to miss out if I don't marry right now, or I'm going to miss out if I don't do this right away. And the thing you have to understand is there's a fear, if I don't do this, someone is going to try to control me. And the learning process here needs to be the difference between being empowered versus fearing you will lose power. And a lot of times people don't understand the difference between it. A lot of people think power is controlling and telling someone what to do, or being as vivacious and being as direct and being as bold as you can be. Sometimes you can have a loose cannon type of energy, especially if this person's Lilith is conjunct any personal planets. And so the importance here is the person has to understand, like, your empowerment comes from within. You're not losing power if you don't focus only on what you want. You learn through empowerment to focus on what you want, but also to focus on what you need. And that's sometimes a struggle with Aries is I desire, but a struggle to actually go forth with what you need, which we tend to see is now the next sign over tends to indulge in what it needs. So your Lilith and Taurus energy. Now again, it is up to you how you choose to interpret this. I'm not going to do it for you unless you are my client, okay? So I'm sorry, I cannot interpret. Don't much respect to anyone who leaves a comment, but I cannot analyze your degrees and your houses via YouTube. I have a whole process of reading options that can help anybody out. And I'm very busy these days. But Lilith and Taurus, the difference here is this person can hoard onto things. There's a fear of losing the essence of self. And this person can have a lot of vices. They could be afraid to let go of negative habits. This is not to say what you covet is bad, right? It's not to say it's bad if you have a lot of items, you have a lot of material things, but you fear losing control. And you can indulge. And some people it's money, and some people it's material objects, and some people it's, you know, it's clothes, it's looking and appearing like they have value. For some people, it can be overindulgence of food or alcohol or things of that nature. It's like this energy here is typically a person who clings on to something, and they sometimes don't think they can change. Remember, Taurus is that fixed earth energy. Again, Lilith is not a personal planet, so this may not even be something you notice until I tell you it could be possible. And so the lesson to ask yourself is what you hold on to. Ask yourself what you hold on to and why. You know, is this causing me any type of distress in my life? If I'm going into debt because I need all these items, am I noticing I'm overindulging in something, so my health is failing? Am I noticing that I hold on to something just because I think it'll protect me? Because Lilith symbolically was afraid to lose the essence of who she was because she'd already been stripped of that with Adam, right? And she had to build herself back up. So you have to ask yourself, what do you refuse to let go of? Is it really providing safety? Okay. With Lilith and Gemini, we're dealing with a blockage in terms of your clarity. The thoughts you hold on to that clouds your sense of clarity. Like you're holding on to a mindset or a thought process that doesn't really benefit you. It doesn't free you. It doesn't free you. So you are captive of your mind. Now, typically when we deal with Gemini energy, the sun or Mercury, we tend to get a more of an objective, right? Needing the information to go out to be dispensed. But with Lilith, remember, she felt repressed, or she felt like she was in denial. Now again, depending on what journey you are in, your Lilith energy will determine how this plays out for you. But you could be withholding information from yourself. There could be paranoia of what others think of you, or never really being direct with others, never really being direct, fearing of being found out, not really clear, and being ambiguous on purpose, right? Because there could be this need to not deal with the facts, not deal with what is in front of you. And that can lead to you being in situations that aren't really for you because you have not yet done the you haven't done the work, the mental work to really release yourself from that. And the question that you can ask yourself to learn from is, what are you avoiding questioning? What about your life have you avoided being curious about? What about your life have you allowed to be locked in, locked up, that you haven't really started to ask the pressing questions, right? Do you take something at face value? Are you believing something that's literally in front of you, but there's ways in which you need to release from that and also understand things beyond that? So this is a very cerebral type of bondage that you would need to really release and allow yourself to really focus on. Now, the Lilith in Cancer, this can be emotional deception of yourself or others. This can be a person who maybe intentionally kind of manipulates emotionally or intentionally holds on to the wrong attachments for fears of being exploited. Remember, Lilith was exploited. And so Cancer energy, we know, is this protective shell. And so what can happen is sometimes people are deceptive because they're trying to guard something, right? They're trying to protect something. And sometimes people are deceptive because there's a fear of vulnerability. And so when Lilith's in Cancer, you really have to examine those parts of your life where you are too protective over self or others, and where you are not truly allowing yourself to nurture things that have the chance to actually grow. So, for example, the learning process here would be, ask yourself, what is it you hold on to so much? Is what you hold on to so much really growing, right? Like, I'm holding on to this person. I'm holding on to this persona. I'm holding on to this part of my life. But then, remember, Lilith was eventually able to develop and grow and empower herself. And so when you are afflicted with your Lilith sign, you are not actually growing. You are kind of staying conditioned in that kind of misery period that Lilith was in before she really truly understood herself. And so a lot of times there's denial. Remember, that key word denial is associated with Lilith before she learned that process of acceptance. And so those are the questions, if you have Lilith in Cancer, to really ask yourself. Lilith in Leo. Sometimes this can be intentionally not being aware of your talents. Now, it's different than a vertex in Leo, if you saw my vertex video, where that's more of a fate indicator. Lilith is either restricting you, you're being shamed, it's denial, and fully acceptance at the end once you truly learn to really embrace yourself. And there can be an intense ego with some of these people too, because you're overcompensating. So sometimes when people aren't sure of what they're really good at, they go to the extreme because they're trying to convince themselves and others that they matter. And so that's where you get the person who is always trying to, overdo things because they're afraid that they're going to be found out, right? You could have feelings of you could feel not good enough because your worth is associated with acknowledgement or validation. If Lilith had stayed with Adam, her validation would have been Adam, and Adam telling her what to do. Again, this is, if you go back to the beginning of the video. And so when you think of that, Lilith would not have been able to be free if she had remained in that situation where she wasn't happy and she didn't feel like she was respected. And so when Lilith's in Leo, there's usually an issue with respect. Okay, it's usually an issue with respect, or you feeling this need to overdo certain actions or certain things in order to feel like you are worthy of someone else's attention and affection. The questions to ask yourself could be thinking about what it feels to be admired by those who really support you instead of those who want to use you for what you have or your popularity. There are people who want to siphon off of you. There are people who just want to latch on and take what you have, right? And so it's important when you have a Lilith in Leo is to truly understand what your value really is, and that it's important to be validated for what you really are and not be validated for what people think you are. And sometimes, let's say you have a son. Let's say you have a person with South Node in Leo, Sun in Leo, Lilith in Leo. Well, wow. There's a whole lesson there about ego. There's a whole lesson there about this person learning what really matters. It's not always shining just to get attention. It's shining because what you really have to offer the world. Now, Lilith in Virgo. Now, this is important because we have to understand this idea of Lilith being this archetype. And so if we're dealing with Lilith as an archetype and what happened where she was told you're not the type of woman that you should be, right? So when you have Lilith in Virgo, there's this concept sometimes of consumed or being consumed with feelings of unworthiness or insecurities that can permeate you. There could be rejection of your true nature. There can be a fear of expressing yourself, especially from a sexual nature, obsession with purity or perfection that goes beyond the sun in Virgo. You get what I'm saying? This could be a person who this is a more rigidness, because at the end of the day, a sun in Virgo or Virgo energy can sometimes be more about task oriented and service and things that you are doing in the waking world to make things improve. But Lilith is more of an archetype of the self, the vision of self, and your ability to feel a level of empowerment. Now, she or he can take longer to fully understand your own needs beyond being of service to another person. Especially if a person has Lilith conjunct Vesta in Virgo. Oh yeah, you probably feel like you always have to be of service to someone. You always have to be doing something for someone else, because that's where you get your sense of value. And sometimes you have to understand that you have to learn that imperfection is also beautiful. Imperfection. There's plenty of beautiful things. There's plenty of works of art that are imperfect. There are plenty of people who are beautiful who are imperfect, right? And so what you want to do is strive to make something better. Can be a process worth enduring. Striving to make something better is a process. You are a work of art. You are in process. You are not less than because you don't serve the needs of another person at that moment in time. And you can get really caught up in this need to serve, or this need, or I don't have any value if I'm not doing this thing that I've always done for people. And, you know, again, if that was that extreme, someone's chart would tell the full picture. But it's about creating your own criteria in order for you to really evolve and be that archetype of a person who is truly strong and able to be independent and also find your own happiness. And again, what I said, this is heightened if any of the Liliths are making aspects to your Vesta. Remember, there's 4 Liliths we're talking about. I told you the easiest one to look at first is the dark moon and Lilith. And then if you needed a reading, you could go from there to see the other ones, or you could use the blog link and go and find them yourself. Lilith and Libra. The mission here is to understand that you are complete, right? You are complete. And I think a lot of people misunderstand what Libra energy is supposed to do. And some Libras misunderstand that Libra energies need to coexist. It's not about melding into one. Libra is the balance beams. It's about 2. Right? So there's a longing feeling that something is missing that a lot of people with Lilith and Libra may encounter. And sometimes you're not conscious of this. Remember, this is not a personal planet. You may not be conscious of this. You may simply say, I don't need relationships, or I don't need somebody, or I don't need that. But at the end of the day, you have to understand the reason is because it's never fully been you've never fully been equipped to understand the full power of a union, which does not strip you of who you are. You might enter difficult unions that strip you of your power, individuality. And this could be the people who don't want a relationship anymore because it's been gone about in the wrong way. But it becomes a kind of turmoil, becomes a situation that constantly keeps coming up because you have not learned. What do you learn? You may have to learn how to be on your own like Lilith before pairing or attaching yourself to an image of romance or partnership. Once Lilith left Adam, when she was banished, she felt shame. She then found ways to procreate, and then she had her children, and then she became powerful, and then she had other people that were able to respect her and fear her. Now again, I'm kind of, shortcutting the whole Lilith myth. There's more to it. I said that in the beginning of the video. You also can look it up yourself. But once Lilith understood who she was and that she didn't need to feel shame and that she was a beautiful being as is and that she had the right to have whatever she wanted, then you have to understand this is what a theme that you may be encountering. And so the goal is to find a counterpart, not just a partner. Look at counterpart, this idea of the part of someone, right? Partnership. You are a partner. You are another part of something, but we don't need to become the same individual. Lilith and Scorpio, this can be an intense concentration on your sexuality or needing to develop it in healthy ways. Again, depending on what conjuncts or squares Lilith is making to other placements in your chart, this could be something that is more pronounced for people, especially because we know Scorpio energy, and I'll go into Scorpio in a second, the meaning. But remember, aspects to Mars and Pluto can lower your true sexual nature if you have been overpowered, if you have been taken advantage of, if you have been abused in any way, especially if someone has like Lilith and Scorpio, conjunct Pluto and Scorpio, squaring Mars. This could be an individual where you are struggling to really own your own sexuality. Remember, that is something that Lilith had to really cope with and understand as well. But when we think of it, some people, Lilith and Scorpio, is really about your intense denial, this intense harboring of some negative feeling, some negative energy that is different than the sun. Remember, the sun is, core traits. Lilith is about empowerment, not power. And so some people can use their power or wield it in ways that is very negative. There could be a skeptical nature in terms of truly understanding how to yield sometimes within power. You could be prone to self-sabotage through internalizing too many negative feelings. You know, because you believe that someone's trying to overpower you, because you believe that, you know, it could be someone who says, you know, intimacy and sex is too intimate. I don't want a relationship because I can handle just having sex and that's it. You could have a person who does that, but then at the end of the day, that doesn't make them happy because their chart shows they actually need commitment. But because they have not worked through this Lilith energy, and because this Lilith energy may be more pronounced in their chart, you see what I'm saying here of how this person now is involved in this cycle of trying to overcompensate for something they need to learn how to deal with. And what I want to mention here is note that both Virgo and Scorpio, and to some extent Taurus, have more direct sexual themes. Astrology, it's a book by Judith Hill. Virgo and Scorpio are both, now they talk about Virgo and Scorpio in the health world and work, you know, Virgo of course and Scorpio and the psychiatry and all that. The book also says Virgo and Scorpio, those signs rule sex work. I don't know if you guys knew that. Now again, that's not me, but that is something just to note. So both Virgo and Scorpio have more direct sexual themes, because you'll say Virgo, oh no, that's the virgin. Y'all have to remember, the original myth of Virgo was an unmarried, unclaimed woman who was intentionally without a man, which captured a Lilith theme. She did not have to have a man. So there's a different level there of how that represents Lilith's independence. And then Scorpio is a sign associated with sexual themes due to its planetary rulership, and right, Mars and Pluto, and together we know that can be like dominating. So together that can definitely represent some sexual energy, and Scorpio ruling over the genitals. Okay, just as a rule, you know, each sign rules a certain body part. Lilith and Sagittarius. Now, you want to be careful. This is similar to what I said in way to Aries, but a little bit different. Adventurousness without a cause. This is the person who is just reckless and risky just for it. Different than a Sagittarius Sun or Sagittarius Mars person who may be able to tell you why they're doing something, what the purpose is. You have to channel different energy when you're dealing with signs in placements like Lilith or Vertex or, you know, any Chiron. The meaning changes slightly. The theme is still the same, but the meaning might change. So it can sometimes mean a person who you mean not knowing what you believe, or rejecting morality for fears that it holds you back or prevents a life of fun. I'm not going to do the right thing. I don't need to do it that way. That's not fun. The ultimate rebellious person, especially if Lilith has any important conjuncts, squares, trines, anything like that. Oppositions, of course, as well. You're learning to repel. Okay. Now, what I mean by learning to repel? Because of that, you have situations where people may make rumors about you or your sexuality. People may make different, have different opinions about what you do and why you do it. And once you come to a place of understanding why, so this is not an attack on people living the way they want to live. The point that I'm saying is you have to know why you're doing it. And that's what Lilith had to understand. She was filled with rage. Lilith did, you know, have moments of feeling upset and angry. But once she came to full acceptance, she understood her journey. Remember, Sagittarius is about journeys. It's about experience. So once you get to a point of experience in life, you can make that decision of, oh, I'm not doing this just to do it. I'm not doing this just to be adventurous. I know that this is a part of my purpose. And the thing you want to understand here is to learn is your morality is not determined only through society's norms or opinions of you. And sometimes we assume that our morality is based on what other people in society push on us. But you are defining what morality means to you. You could be engaged in certain behaviors that other people disagree with, but at the end of the day, you're a good person. And so that is something just to keep in mind about your Lilith and Sagittarius energy does require a certain soul seeking. It requires a certain level of experience and understanding yourself in relation to what it is that you truly believe about yourself and the way that you behave in accordance to, like, you know, what society or what other people may present or push on you, because it is at the end of the day about this need for freedom and expression with Sagittarius energy in general. Now, Lilith and Capricorn, you can be hindered by pressures of needing to conform. or adhere to certain expectations, to a certain expectation or tradition. You could be heavily influenced. Here's the difference here. A Sun in Capricorn person may willingly do this because it's a part of them. Lilith is about restriction. It's about rebellion, shame, denial, or it can be about acceptance at the end. And so it's fear or tarnishing a reputation. If I do this, it's going to make my family look bad. If I do this, it's going to make my community look bad. If I do this, it's going to make me look bad. If I do this, it's going to make this person look bad. Oh, it's going to make my husband look bad. Oh, it's going to make my wife look bad. Lilith in Capricorn, regardless, it's always something where you're more concerned about your reputation than you are about yourself. Okay? And this energy here, I've seen as well, when you can look at the Lilith in Capricorn, women in particular may often feel like male figures overshadow their success, right? Or the husband. Oh, you married him, he's so successful, but she's successful in her own right. Or you feel in some way that there's some energy that is kind of hindering you and hindering your full representation of feeling ambitious and feeling successful. Now, I'm not saying that men can't feel that way as well, but upon study, I've seen that a lot with women chart, female charts. What you can learn, that some of your success in life comes from within and not a standard that has been created for you to obey. That success has many layers to it, and that Lilith's original story, Lilith's original mission, nobody would have thought she came out of that alive, right? No one would have thought being banished would have her be a figure that people still look at today as someone who empowered herself after being banished, after being, mistreated, or after being disrespected. And now, Lilith's symbol, we know, has many meanings, but at the end of the day, we understand that she's a powerful feminine archetype. And so that's something just to keep in mind, that you're understanding that success is also from within. This is the person who decides, maybe Lilith has some aspects to certain planets. This is the person who decides, I don't need to keep working this job where they keep telling me that I have to do this. I don't feel free. And then they leave. Maybe their Lilith is conjunct their midheaven in Capricorn, right? And eventually this person realizes that they can still find success, but it doesn't have to be under someone else's pressure or under someone else telling them what they have to do or making them try to submit to them. You may feel uncertain about certain qualities you possess. You feel like you never quite fit in with certain ideologies or expectations of your sexuality or your demeanor. Your rebellion against something shows the area of yourself you need to define the most. Now, I'll talk about that in a second. But in general, what this typically means is, we know that Aquarius deals a lot with this concept of needing freedom, of not being restricted by certain social norms. And it's a little bit different than Capricorn, where there's a focus on more the traditional aspect. With Aquarius, it is more so about never quite feeling like you fit the prototype of what it means to be, a woman or be a man, or to be a certain person of your community or be a person of your culture. And a part of that is finding where you belong. Like Lilith, she had to take a stance and she had to find where she belonged. Remember, Lilith is not necessarily, it's not a personal planet. It's not something you have to focus on every day. But in moments and when you are feeling restricted, where you are feeling uncertain, this can be a way in which you have to look at, like I said, the area of yourself you need to define is the one where you feel the most restricted, or the one where you feel the most awkward or uncertain of how you can really define your own power. So I wrote an example. A man rebels against marriage because his parents got divorced and hated each other, right? So he says, I don't ever want to get married. I saw it. It ripped my family apart. He thinks he hates marriage, but his chart shows a need for companionship and maybe even marriage, depending on the placements. Now, he learns that he actually doesn't like the dynamic set up by his parents, and he has to recover to see what healthy relationships look like. So he can go on to be married. He just has to define what it looks like for him, because his parents maybe weren't well balanced. Maybe they weren't equally yoked. Maybe his parents maybe they were expected to get married because there was a baby involved, or maybe they were expected to get married because they grew up together and their parents thought there would be a great relationship. So he actually has to allow himself to develop a healthy relationship with what it looks like. Does that mean he has to get married? No. But if someone's chart shows a tendency for something and we see that it doesn't really happen, sometimes we can look at some of these other placements to see the blockages. We can look at retrogrades. We can look at squares. We can look at oppositions. We can look at Lilith. We can look at Chiron as an example for why certain energy may need to be worked through a little bit more. Next, Lilith in Pisces. This can represent running from any opportunity to take ownership and power over your divinity. This could be kind of repressing your true nature because there's expectations placed on you from other people. This can sometimes mean inability to understand how to remain compassionate while also putting your needs first, sacrificing too much of your own development. Really understand that if Lilith had submitted fully, she would never have risen to her full potential, right? And so thinking of that symbolically, if you have Lilith in Pisces, it really represents this kind of you needing to kind of become a phoenix that rises from the ashes. And that doesn't mean compromising the more sensitive, softer parts of yourself that require you to engage with humanitarianism or universalism, right? People repressing your light could be causing you to mistrust your own light. People repressing your light could cause you to mistrust your own inner light, right? Because people want so much of you that they don't believe in what you actually can do. And so what you would have to learn if you Lilith and Pisces is to indulge in your shadow side for self-preservation. A shadow side is not bad. It requires you to do the work. And it requires you to do the work and to face things. And sometimes Pisces energy doesn't really want to face the things that are harsh or difficult. So this is something just to keep in mind that you may have to do. And again, it depends on how prominent Lilith is in your chart. It depends on, maybe you've already recovered and done this work, you know, but also it's about admit your reality so you can take back power and not fearing your shadow side.